Good morning. One final good morning. Treble welcome. I'm Colin Brown. I'm the chairman of the Voice of the Listener and Viewer, and you're very, very welcome to our spring conference. This conference, I think, comes at a particularly interesting time for broadcasting policy for audiences, viewers and listeners in the UK. So I think we've managed to assemble today a pretty impressive cast of speakers. So I'm extremely pleased to everybody who's been able to come and support us in that way. One or two just house rules as ever. Make sure your phones are turned off or at least on silent. The emergency doors are basically the doors you came in. It's never happened in the 40-odd years we've been having conferences, but I guess it's always the first time. So let me just move straight to the first item on the agenda today. We've got, as our keynote speaker this morning, Jonathan Munro, who's BBC News Global Director, Director of the World Service, and currently Interim Chief Executive of News. I will let Jane Martinson, who's chairing the session, do the full introduction. Jane, once again, has been here many times before for us, and she's the Marjorie Dean Professor of Financial Journalism at City University, London, a long-term commentator, journalist background, head of media at The Guardian, an extremely capable person to be running this session. So it's over to you, Jane.
Thank you so much, Colin. I think it's a mark of the VLV standing in our media ecosystem that they've got Jonathan Munro, the acting CEO of BBC News, but also Global Director of the World Service, to come and talk today, given how what's happening at the BBC and how important it is, and just before the new Director General starts. So without much more ado, I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who has some thoughts, and then we've got, I'll ask some questions. We'll have time for some questions, but there is a really hard end at 5 to 11 because Jonathan has a plane to get. So Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having me back, actually. It's a couple of years since I was here, and it's a pleasure to be back this morning. I seem to start pretty much every public appearance by saying what a busy time it is in the news agenda. You probably heard me say exactly that last time I was here, but it is, isn't it? And you'll be aware of some of the big issues that we are dealing with day in, day out, the war in Iran, for example, and all of the knock-ons of that, whether that's oil prices or the link to anti-Semitism in the UK. The Iranian war is something I always mention with coupling it to another point, which is to credit every time I do that our colleagues in BBC Persian, who play an extraordinarily important role for the people of Iran. A quarter of all adults in Iran get news from BBC Persian at least once a week, which is an astonishing reach into a country without free media. There's the political turmoil at Westminster. Have we seen the back of that? Definitely not. And that's kept us very occupied. And I was personally very uplifted by the far side of the moon mission by Artemis 2, which is really important in the mix that we keep some news that's uplifting and hopeful, and it's about human achievement and endeavour. I hope also you've caught some of our investigative work of late, because I'm really proud of it. We've launched a programme called Global Eye since I was last standing on this podium, which is a weekly BBC Two platform for some of our World Service investigations. Recently, we've been investigating the paternity of a generation of Kenyan children who were fathered by British soldiers who were on deployment there and have effectively been abandoned since then, or a generation of school children in Pakistan who've been exposed to the HIV virus through malpractice, or children in what was then West German institutions being abused and experimented on in the 1970s. And just recently, we've run the latest of our series of programs called What Happened At, and this was a program called What Happened at Chernobyl. And they're designed, most people in this room, I'm going to make a guess, will remember Chernobyl, but these are the for audiences that don't, that people who weren't around to witness the big defining moments in our lives. We're meeting today, however, at a consequential time also for the BBC, not just for the journalistic agenda. As Jane and others will know, Matt Britton, our new Director General, begins his work in 3 or 4 weeks from now, having been appointed after the resignation of Tim Davie. And I know everybody here will also be aware that the BBC's announced a significant savings programme, which will need to kick in by the turn of the next financial year, in other words, by next April. And that's about £500 million savings across the BBC, or to put it another way, about 10% of the BBC's cost. And that is a significant portion of money to take out of our expenditure in a relatively short period of time. Why? Well, because there's a very simple truth here which we need to address in order to solve it. The gap between our costs and our income is growing. It's growing literally every week, every month. Our current funding model is not fit for the public service mission of the future. It was born in a different era. If I give you just two contrasting statistics, you'll understand why. 94% of people in Britain use the BBC on a monthly basis, but fewer than 80% of households pay the licence fee. So you can see in those two stats that gap, and it is widening, not shrinking. News of savings is hard. It's hard for us, it's hard for audiences, because everything we touch or try to change, or in some cases close down, is somebody's favourite piece of the BBC's offer to them. So it's not easy to make these choices, but we're working through plans, and we've said to our staff within News that we will be able to say more in June. So I can't today go into the details of what we're planning to do, but I can certainly talk about the principles that are shoring up those decision-making processes. And those principles that I've outlined to staff really revolve around three things. First of all, we have to get money out of the way we are structured. Secondly, in that process, we want to continue to champion distinctive journalism. Now, that can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and I've mentioned some of them already in my opening words. But thirdly, we want to continue to drive for digital growth. I'm acutely aware that our programmes on linear channels remain incredibly important. I watch them and listen to them myself. They're incredibly important to people in the UK and around the world, but we can't ignore audience behaviour. To give you one stat, for example, the BBC Live page on the assassination of Charlie Kirk reached 64 million people. If we added up all of our linear audiences on that story over an extended period of time, it would not reach 64 million people. So the drive to digital is a fact. It is accelerating. We have to move our resources into that, and those resources are diminishing, not growing. And this comes, of course, at a time when top of Matt Britton's agenda will be securing the new Royal Charter. The existing one runs out at the end of the next calendar year. You'll be aware there's a sort of ping-pong goes on. The government issues what's called a green paper. We respond. Members of the public, I hope many people in this room have responded. They can input into the DCMS, and we'll now await the government's response to that in the form of a white paper later in the year. It's also at a time when our public purpose is at the forefront of our offer to the UK audiences, in particular with the biggest set of elections outside a general election that come up a week on Thursday. They are, as you know, for the Scottish Parliament, the Senate in Wales, local elections across parts of England, and some mayoralties too. I'm not John Curtis, I'm not going to do the crystal ball thing, but I can tell you that what's obvious is that we're dealing with a very different political landscape. Gone are the days when the vast majority of people either voted for one or other of the two main parties. That is simply not the political landscape we are in at the moment. And we've also got a devolved United Kingdom. So it's multi-party politics, multinational democracies, and different systems of allocating seats to votes. It's complicated, but it's also really exciting, and it's the peak of what we do in the public purpose. We've already held debates in Scotland and Wales, special editions of Question Time, for example, and the BBC is therefore providing a vital function, giving audiences the information they need before they make their choice. It's their choice, not ours, but they need to be well informed by the biggest public service broadcaster. That is supporting democracy, which is part of our public purpose. Debates holding our aspiring leaders to account, fact-checking to examine the claims they're making, postcode search tools giving voters clear and easy access to information about the candidates and indeed ultimately the results in their areas. That'll be important, by the way, because the results day is also David Attenborough's 100th birthday, so we're boxing and coxing on BBC One between breaking news from key seats around the UK and celebrating one of the great broadcasters of the television era. BBC Verify is bringing facts that viewers and audiences can trust, and that transparency offered by Verify and other teams brings me on to another key part of what we can offer in the Charter period, and that's the boost of media literacy. We fully support the government's proposal to update our public purposes with an explicit reference to media literacy and to countering disinformation, which is infectious around the world. Everywhere we go, we see and hear disinformation. And we've set out our ambition to reach more children with modernised education and an updated children's offer, with media literacy at its heart. Supporting democracy, boosting education, vital to the future of the UK, of course, but they're also vital outside this country. And as Colin mentioned, my day job, when I'm not interiming, is running the BBC World Service, and I'm very proud of what we do in that space. So a few weeks ago, we have a programme called World Questions. I don't know whether anyone's heard it, but it's a sort of international equivalent of Any Questions. And it travels the world and reaches audiences where they are. And it was recently in Nepal. The country's just taken a step into the unknown after its own election, and that followed the collapse of a previous government. It was quite a difficult, turbulent time there. After the recording, a Nepalese media commentator, a guy by the name of Sahat Kansakar, wrote up a review of the programme and said, "The conversations in Nepal usually avoid real questions. This one didn't." That's a big testament to what the World Service can do. We offer educational programming through something called DARS, which is the Arabic word for lesson, in Afghan languages and Arabic too. I think the deprivation of education for girls in Afghanistan is one of the great scandals in the modern world, and we are there to help step in and plug the gap. I've talked about funding challenges, and I've talked about the role of the World Service. So those things come together in the funding settlement for the World Service itself. At the end of March, we finally received confirmation of funding from the Foreign Office, a department of government which has taken a huge cut in its own spending because of the shifting priorities in Whitehall. And we really welcome the government's continued support and growth in the financial support for the World Service, but it's frozen for 3 years. So I can't honestly tell you that that puts us on a firm foundation for the long-term future. I fear it does not. So we are exploring new ways of what we do, being more efficient, using AI, for example, to translate into a whole range of new languages. We just launched BBC Polska for Polish audiences. We're rolling out other Eastern European languages along the same lines, and that model can be exported to existing languages too. But if we want to continue to deliver trusted news and information in all those languages to audiences of need, whether they're in Gaza or Afghanistan or Sudan or anywhere else around the world that's in troubled times, we need full and stable funding from the UK government, and many of you will know that that is a central part of the Charter pitch. So I'm asking all of you who share that aspiration to support us in doing that, and please vocalise that plea whenever you can on our behalf, but also give us your criticism, give us your feedback. This sort of forum is really valuable to us because it opens up a debate about what the BBC should and shouldn't be doing. So Jane, I'm not going to take any more time with my remarks because Q&A is upon us and I've got a flight to catch. So over to you, and we'll try and track through as many issues as people want to raise.
Thank you. Jonathan, as you say, a hugely consequential time for the BBC, which has had its challenges over the past 6 months, if not many years before. Can we just start with funding, though? As that seems to me, obviously, a really urgent demand. You've asked for full funding for the World Service. Mm-hmm. So all the money for World Service content should come from the government, is what you're asking for?
Yes, if you go back through recent history, that was the model until the coalition government changed the scope of the licence fee and asked the BBC to take in World Service costs into licence fee, and that took effect in 2014. The World Service is about, in financial terms, is about 40% of the activity of BBC News. So it's a significant chunk of our money. And over the years, we've tried to use that money wisely and to expand the footprint of the World Service, and it now reaches 418 million people a week, and BBC News overall reaches that. Most of that's the World Service. And we've tried to expand into areas where there are audiences of need. But when you put that amount of demand into a finite pot of money, obviously you have to make other decisions, tough decisions, in order to continue to resource the World Service. The truth is that at Westminster, there's an awful lot of support to the World Service. It's rare to find a member of Parliament who doesn't think the World Service does something very important for the UK and very important for populations around the world. And they love that.
Cross-party or mainly
cross-party,
the government?
absolutely cross-party. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And The Charter is a time when we want licence fee payers to focus their money on services that are available to them and targeted for them within the UK, whilst the World Service is funded by government, because in truth it's a brand for the UK, not just for the BBC. Now, in the small print of how that works, there may be some value back to the licence fee payer that we can credit, but the principle should be that the licence fee paid by UK consumers should be spent on products for them.
One of the statistic you used, about 94% of people in this country actually accessing BBC services, but less than 80% paying for it. Do you fear that in this charter it will be the sort of mark the death knell for universal services, of which the BBC is so famous?
Well, I really hope not. The idea of the BBC is, and I think should remain, universal reach. 94% is universal reach in real terms. I think
How do we make sure everybody pays?
Yeah, well, so in the Charter, we've in our response to the Charter document, we've talked about the need for continued public funding. We believe that is the right route forward. There are different views at Westminster, of course, about precisely what model that should be. We don't believe the BBC should be funded in the UK by advertising or subscription, because that is the opposite of universality. By definition, subscription is not universality. Now, the model of the licence fee is showing its age, it's creaking, and that's because the advance of technology in the industry, the delivery of media products and content on streaming platforms, for example, does not in all cases mean that you need a licence fee to consume. And therefore, the enforcement of the licence fee is getting very difficult. We believe that whatever the public funding model is, it should apply to the consumption of media across the piece, and that will expand the footprint of people who need to pay the licence fee. That means the licence fee itself, the fee per household, does not need to accelerate in terms of its value to plug that gap. We can plug that gap by widening the remit.
Okay, thank you. I think some in the audience will have picked up the line you said about obviously focusing on digital because the reach and impact is so great.
Yeah.
But it sounded as if those cuts, those £500 million worth of cuts, might hit linear channels. Is that, I know you say that you're going to say more in June, but can you commit to sort of keeping the number of linear channels for news and beyond?
Look, we're in a long, generation-long probably, transition between an audience that was almost entirely linear to an audience which is increasingly digital. For the foreseeable future, I think linear channels and linear delivery are fundamental to the BBC. It's fundamental. But they need to live in a mixed economy where the footprint of digital is growing. So in news, for example, where we're looking at how we roll out news stories, investigations, we did one a couple of weeks ago, for example, about drug sales from corner shops in the West Midlands, sort of earthy, grassroots, everyday issues that affect people's lives. We do what we call a rollout. We know what time is that story going to be released, and those are usually pegged around what we call linear bulletins, 10 o'clock at night or 6 in the morning for breakfast. But if you go early in the morning, you also get a greater digital imprint because the website does more business for us in the mornings than it does at night. And people will have their own viewing habits, but broadly speaking, people may recognise that sort of pattern from their own lives. So when we're taking into account how we roll out those stories, we absolutely want an online piece which is rich and deep and intelligently written. We want a radio and television version. We want an iPlayer documentary version for the following weekend, which will also run on the news channel. We want a social media stream. We want a live page on the relevant stories. I could go on and on. The whole point is to multi-purpose that journalism. And the delivery to linear audiences remains really, really important. I dare say that this probably isn't a completely typical audience because by definition people in this room are interested in the broadcasting world. But I would think the penetration of linear programmes in this audience is quite high. Most people will probably have seen a BBC News Bulletin or heard a BBC News Bulletin in the last 24, 48 hours. Probably not everybody, but most people. Younger audiences are not behaving that way. So we need to be all things to all people, and that transition is a very long period.
Thank you. I understand Matt Britton, who starts on the 18th of May, has been on a listening tour of BBC newsrooms and other channels. Can you give us a sense of what has he said about what changes he wants to bring?
He has been in. He's been to the building 4, 5, 6 days probably so far, and I think he's been to Salford and Cardiff as well. I was heartened with my sort of day job hat on that the first thing he did, other than meeting his immediate team, was to go and see the World Service, and particularly our colleagues in the Persian service that I mentioned earlier, and since then he's been and seen most parts of news, but he's been on a wider tour than that. He's been to some of the drama productions and to some of our music radio stations as well, and to local radio. So this is a steep learning curve. Let's be honest. It's a big, big organisation, 20,000 people, with a very complicated web of issues that we're dealing with right now, some of which I touched on in my remarks. He's full of questions. I'm not going to preempt what I think he's going to do. That's for him to announce, and I don't want to guess, particularly if I'm wrong. It might not be good for my career. But he's full of questions, and they're intelligent and well-based questions. And they're questions based on trying to do the right thing for public service delivery in the next 5 years, let's say, the charter period and beyond. He is asking questions of junior staff and senior staff. He's going through the organisation without hierarchy. He's very personable. He stops at people's desks and asks people what they're doing and why, and he's in listening mode. And that's really great. I think that's exactly the right place to start.
Jonathan, you've mentioned your day job and your career. I'm going to have to ask you at this point, when will we hear whether the acting job might be full-time and what the new head of news will be, or who?
Well, to your question, when, I wish I knew.
Rough idea.
Look, Matt comes in, as you said, on the 18th of May. Samir Shah, the chair of the BBC, when he gave evidence to a select committee just before Christmas, I think it was, mentioned the idea of having a deputy director general. I think that's something that Matt needs to come in and take a view on about how that will work in his management team, what sort of shape and size of job would that be, what would their remit be, and so on. That's got to be the first thing. And then he's got to make a decision about whether the appointment of a substantive CEO for news is the next order priority or further down the line. That's entirely up to him. So I don't know, but it won't be before he starts, obviously. I don't think it'll be before the Deputy Director General issue is resolved.
So we might not know until the summer, from what you're saying.
Well, it's already April, isn't it? It's nearly May tomorrow, I think. So the summer's not far away. So I think that's not an unreasonable assumption.
Okay. I want to go to questions, but I have two ones that I know that members have talked about. One is actually about domestic news, because of the changes that have been made because of previous cost cutting. There has been a sort of more domestic news on some of the news channels than heretofore, with the sort of, and given how much is happening internationally. What do you say to that charge, to accept it?
I think it's really, I'd love to see the methodology of that, because it's not a picture I recognise. You mentioned the channels. I don't know whether you specifically mean the news channel, but it is a merged domestic and global channel. It runs an awful lot of foreign news. And that's its remit. That's what it's supposed to do. If you're taking a story, obviously the dominant story of the year so far has been the military attacks on Iran and everything that's followed from that. I don't know whether the methodology is saying Iran is one story or whether it's 20 stories per day that we're doing different angles on. We're reporting from Dubai or from Kuwait or from the Turkish border or from Tehran, where Lise Doucet was last week, or from Washington, where the policy is being set. To me, they're all different stories. They just happen to come under the same banner of the Middle East and everything sails with it. There have been editions of some of our linear programs. We were talking about linear just a few minutes ago, at 10 o'clock at night particularly, which is a more foreign-facing program than the 6 o'clock news. We try and put a little bit of difference in the texture of those two programs for different audiences. There have been times on the 10 o'clock news where actually I've come off the program and thought, there's been so much good foreign news here and so much excellent location reporting from Lise and Jeremy and the Persian Service and others. We haven't actually got many domestic stories over the line today, and let's try and rebalance that a little bit tomorrow. So I'm surprised that is a critique, but covering the UK is one of our primary responsibilities. It absolutely is. And working with our colleagues in local radio and regional and national television, we really try to do that. The Globe is also a very unstable and turbulent place, or at least significant parts of it. We have a massive news driver. Whether you agree with his policies or not is a matter for you, but Donald Trump is clearly driving the news agenda across the globe, including his relations with the UK. Does a spat between Trump and Starmer count as foreign news or home news? Does it matter? It's just an important story.
You've brought him up, so I'm going to have to ask.
That's dangerous, wasn't it?
You should never do that with journalists.
No, never.
What's the state of the lawsuit? Can you update us today?
The truth is, I can't really update you because we're in a legal process, and you will all know that lawyers will be keen for us not to expand on what we've said already. The state of play is, as we've outlined previously, just briefly, that we accepted and apologised for the edit itself, but we don't accept the defamation because the programme was never shown in the United States and so on, and he won the election anyway. And that's the legal case. And beyond that, I think we just need to respect the legal process and not put ourselves in a position where we're causing ourselves problems by over-explaining what's going on.
Has it made, listen to Gary O'Donoghue, as I'm sure many of us did, from the, the assassination attempt.
Yeah.
Has it made it more difficult to report from the White House?
No, not really, in truth. Access to the White House is as normal. I mean, you saw that assassination attempt obviously wasn't at the White House itself, but you will have seen reporting from the White House immediately afterwards, when Donald Trump held a press conference. That's business as usual. That's going on.
Thank you. Right, I want to make sure that we get some questions. So, please, hands up. Marvellous. Right, OK. I've forgotten your name for a moment, but yes, sorry, Paddy. Paddy, Alex, and chap at the back. Is there a woman with their hand up? Right.
Yes.
OK. And then you. Right. So, Paddy, Alex, chap at the back, and then this lady here. If we
Paddy
can do those
Barwise from
quickly.
London Business School. I'd like to pick up on the 94%, 80% statistics,
Sure.
And apologies to other people who've heard me make this point before. The 80% says that 80% of households use the BBC in a month, meaning 20% don't.
No, that's
Pay.
right. 94%.
Sorry, 20%
Yeah.
don't pay, either legally or through evasion. The 94% refers to individuals. Now, the licence fee is at the household level, and so it seems to me that the key comparator is the percentage of households that use the BBC in a month. And that's quite expensive to measure, but it has been measured once, which was 11 years ago, and it was 99% in a week.
Yeah, and the difference.
So the plea is, and I guess it's a plea to the new DG, please replicate that study. It might now be only 98% or 97% in a week. In a month, it's likely to be 98, 99%. In other words, the number of people free riding is far, far larger than the percentage of households which genuinely don't consume the BBC.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point that data can be used and abused, can't it? And I take that point completely. So let me pass your plea on to the new DG and we'll see where we get to. Thank you.
Could you, and Alex,
Very
would
much.
you mind ask a question and then could the lady ask a question at the same time? We'll do two at once. I'm really conscious of time and
Sure.
that's all.
So my question is, again, I was struck by the size of the audience, the access to Charlie Kirk live blog, 64 million, and your suggestion that the cuts are going to inevitably mean mirroring audience behaviour and a shift from linear into investment in digital. Now, the website is not currently in scope of licence fee. Is there a risk that by pushing further into digital, you're going to widen that gap between the people accessing and the people paying? And do you think that the BBC website and app should be brought into scope of licence fee to help bridge that funding gap?
So that's one question. Do you want to take another one?
Yeah, just so that we can. Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Hello, Ellie Khan from Broadcast. Other than BBC Verify, what's your plan for repairing audience trust in news?
Okay, let me start with that second point and I'll come to Alex's point. When you say other than Verify, I want to say Verify is a very important part of that, and it's about transparency, not just about fact-checking. It's about explaining our workings, and that's not just confined, by the way, to the BBC Verify team. That is a broader task that we have on our shoulders. There's a trust in news, in BBC News, is actually increasing and is up, and is within the range of what we would target. And there's something about actually the way the BBC reports on itself when there's problems at the BBC, which, let's be honest, there have been a few problems in the BBC, which actually help us in trust. Are we doing a good job in analysing where we've gone wrong? Now, I'm not suggesting we want any more things to go wrong, but when we do have that, we want to be transparent about it. And I do think trust is a very important metric for us. Do people trust what the BBC does and what the BBC says? And we are working on that continually. I don't think it's all about the BBC Verify brand. I think it's a broader contextual point. Impartiality is clearly at the heart of that. We know that that's been challenging because a number of stories that we have been covering of late in significant volume have been very polarizing for audiences, including for license fee payers. Obviously, the position in the Gaza conflict is forefront in mind in that. There are a lot of very strong views, and finding an impartial space for that story has been a challenge, as we know, not just for us, but for other organizations which are charged with impartiality, those regulated broadcasters, for example. On Alex's point about the license fee, we really want to debate with the public, with the government, the DCMS, as we run into charter renewal. We've got, as I say, about a year and a half to run on the existing charter, about the scope of public funding for the BBC. What does it pay for? Should the World Service be in or out? Should platforms be in or out? Those are the sorts of debates we want to have. As linear consumption increases, whether it's website or even iPlayer for on-demand or BBC Sounds, we need to be clear what the license fee is paying for. What do you get for your money if you're a license fee payer? And the license fee structure, as I mentioned when I was speaking a few moments ago, does feel out of date. And the advancement in the delivery of media, even in the last 10 years, just in this charter period, let alone going back further back, appears to be significantly outpacing the license fee model. And that's why we want to cherish universality. We want to cherish the idea that that is underwritten by the British public, but we need to be clear that the remit of what they're paying for needs to be modernised.
And Alex's specific point about the app as well.
Yeah. Well, look, all BBC products should be in the discussion about what is and isn't underwritten by the licence fee. So it's not about picking off one against the other. It's about the general offer that we're making to the public.
Thanks. The gentleman there's been waiting patiently. More questions? I think we have time.
Hi, Jonathan. It's Gareth from International Broadcasting Trust. The study that we've done looking at the proportion of international coverage on news will be out next Wednesday. Right. And I can certainly talk to you about how we categorise what is foreign news and what isn't. And just a side note, in terms of the impact of the Trump presidency, actually, when we look back at our studies from 2016 and 2009, there's a disproportionate presence of US news across the board anyway. My question for you is, what makes BBC News distinctive? How would you describe the distinctive nature of its news agenda and the way that it goes about presenting its news?
Do you want me to take that, or do you want another question?
There isn't anyone. Oh,
Okay, fine.
There's a
Fine,
question
fine,
here.
fine.
Marvellous. Right, there's this. Yeah, and then we come to you, Nick.
I'm Charlotte from the University of Leeds. Your growth strategy depends on the same algorithms and AI systems you've criticised for spreading disinformation and polarisation. I just wondered what differentiates a public service broadcaster competing in the attention economy from big tech companies doing the same, and how would the public know if that distinction started to erode?
Great question. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'll just take them in the reverse order again. I think the answer to that is that everything we do under the BBC News brand is regulated for quality and impartiality, regardless of the platform. So if now, of course, people can fake our brand, and that has happened, and we are very hot on brand policing, but it's very difficult to stop it all. But if you come to the BBC on any platform, you are getting something that's the same standard that we would expect from a regulated output. On the proportionality of American coverage that Gareth mentioned, when you say the coverage of America is disproportionate, I think that's a judgment. That's not a science. That's a judgment about what the proportionality is that should be lent to the biggest news driver in the world and everything that sails with him. But I'd be really interested to hear your report, Gareth. Sorry, what was the second point in your question?
The question is, how would you describe the distinctiveness of BBC News? What makes BBC News distinctive?
Okay. How long have I got? Look, because of the privilege of public funding, and this is a privilege, we are able to have people all over the world reporting with real expertise on things that are happening in their hinterland in a way that no other news organisation can match. And if I'm going to pull one thing out and say this is the defining thing about the BBC, it's that Steve Rosenberg is in Russia, speaking fluent Russian to Russian people about what they're making of the situation in Russia. It's that the funding allows us to continue. I think we're the only UK newsroom now who are continually present in Kyiv. It's about being able to say to our Africa correspondents that we want an investigation that I mentioned earlier about the paternity of a generation of Kenyan children. It's about being able to say to our Berlin correspondent, go away and investigate that story about what was happening in West German children's homes. It doesn't matter how long it takes, we want the story. Now, that is a privilege about the way we use our resources. It's not to be taken lightly. I could also talk about specialist journalism in sport, education, health, politics, you know, what Chris Mason does, but other organisations have got political editors, and some of them are excellent. What the BBC can deliver is something broader and deeper for audiences, and that's why we want to protect what we've got and grow the ability to invest in our journalism in the new charter period.
Thank you. Peter's been waiting. Marvellous. Loads of hands. Claire here. So
quick.
I think that, yes.
Yeah.
Right. I think this might be the last two. Peter
Yeah.
and then Claire. Sorry. Can you... Oh, you could shout, maybe.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Peter York, and a few years back, with this young man here, I co-wrote a book about the BBC.
Yep.
In its defence, the BBC does a lot of stuff about and from America, but it appears wholly to ignored the Yale 3. You know what I mean by the Yale 3? Sure. Did it wholly ignore the Yale 3 and their flight to Canada? Has it ignored the total mainstream media controversy that's all across anything you can get from America just by scrolling down YouTube? Has it platformed any of the Yale 3? You know the significance of this question. You know what the Yale 3 said about the current American administration. Is the BBC censoring what the Yale 3 said?
Do you want me to answer that question, or do you want to say some more?
Yes, and then Claire. Well, actually, Claire.
I just wanted to ask, where are you increasing? Sorry. Excuse me. Well, I have a loud voice, I think.
And I was going to repeat it, if not anyway, but go on.
Oh, I see. I'm very pleased to hear about the increase to 480 million total reach, because, you know, that's a really significant element. Is that actually driven by the sense of impartiality, the freedom of access? You know, all of these things seem to me very important, and I've been rather perturbed by the news that there's a paywall being introduced for the heaviest users in North America, and I would love you to. I think the universal reach issue of the BBC makes the BBC one of the most important brands that the UK, or one of the most important services to humanity. The idea of calling it a brand is beyond me. It's a service to humanity.
Just in the interest of time, let me just try and pick off both those questions. First of all, universal reach, to be clear, is a UK objective. It's 94%, or to the point that was made earlier, it might be more if you measure it slightly differently. We're not aiming to be universally reached by everybody on Earth. That would be nice, but it's not our objective. The objective of universal reach is about the funding of the UK operation by the licence fee. So that, just to be clear about that. To your point about paywalls, we've got some trade-offs to make. The American media market is not an audience of need. They've got free media in the US. If we can generate money in the US, that helps us to defer other costs and focus our public funding on audiences of need, like Afghanistan, where you're never going to succeed with a paywall. So these are choices about what we do in different markets, and the whole world is not the same place. We have different strategies in different parts of the world. Just briefly on the L3, we're not censoring anybody. That's not our trade or our business. I can't tell you honestly whether we've ever done a story on the L3. I'm sure we have. I'd have to come back to you and.
Checked it.
It's a very
within my limited resources, there appears to be nothing.
Right. So Peter,
it's consumed mainstream America.
Yeah.
The BBC's
I know.
counterparts and peers for a year.
Yeah. It's a very specific question you're asking me to dig into. I'm very happy to do that, but off the top of my head right now in this room, I don't know when we last did a story about the Yale 3, but I'm very happy to come back to you offline and let you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. I'm afraid we have
Yeah.
run out of time.
Thank
So I
you.
don't want him to miss his flight.
Yes.
So thank you so much for the question. Thank you for coming.
You're very welcome. Thanks very much.